A few months ago, Avatar: The Last Airbender returned to Netflix in the US, resulting in a massive surge in people rewatching the show or watching it for the first time, which has been a lot of fun. I love The Last Airbender. I've made a bunch of videos talking about what a great series it is, and it's exciting to have everyone talking about it so much again. But with the return of The Last Airbender has also come the return of comparisons to The Legend of Korra, and the, I think, undeserved hate for the sequel series. I love The Legend of Korra. I think it's a really fun show with great writing and incredible characters. I enjoyed watching it when it came out, and I still enjoy rewatching it today. I think both of these shows are amazing in their own ways. So with The Legend of Korra now making its way to Netflix as well, I thought I'd present you all with the case for The Legend of Korra. First, some quick disclaimers. You obviously do not have to like The Legend of Korra. Enjoying a show is a very subjective experience, and it's completely okay if you don't enjoy it. Everything I'm saying in this video is my opinion based on how I interpreted the show, but if you have a different view, that's totally okay. I'm not saying that this is the only way to experience the show. You're allowed to have any opinions you want about Korra, I'm just telling you what my opinions are, okay? Oh, and obviously, big spoiler warning for all 4 seasons of The Legend of Korra. So to start, I just want to talk about some of the aspects of The Legend of Korra that I love, and then later in the video, I'll address some specific criticisms of the show that I've seen floating around. Alright, so one of my favorite parts of The Legend of Korra was the theme of healing from trauma that's especially prevalent in the beginning of Book 4, following Korra being poisoned by Zahir. Korra's recovery is very, very slow and non-linear. She spends a few weeks barely able to sleep or eat from her PTSD, then works with Katara to try and heal. She barely makes any progress for 6 months and lashes out at Katara because she's frustrated and upset and tired. Then when she thinks she's better because she can walk, she's still tormented by the damage done to her mind. It takes her 2 years before she can even bring herself to write to her closest friend at the time, Asami. And when she goes back out into the world, she realizes that she can't meet people's expectations of who she's supposed to be. By the time she meets Toph and finally starts to address the root of her psychological trauma, it's been 3 years. The Legend of Korra never pretends like healing from trauma is easy or even a straight line. It acknowledges how hard it is, how long it takes, and how you might never go back to how you were before. Even after she meets Toph and gets the rest of the poison out of her, she continues to have mental blocks. I mean, she's basically healing for the entire season. And the moment where she has to confront Zahir to get some closure and finally be able to accept what happened is so scary and tense. It has you on the edge of your seat because of all the emotional development that led up to her even being able to do that. It's not a physical fight, but it somehow packs even more of a punch. And that encounter teaches her that even though she'll never be able to forget, she can move past it, even if she'll never be the same. Korra's arc here is just so well written, so powerfully human, and so perfect for Korra herself. She grew up in this sheltered life dreaming of being this super powerful avatar, and now that she's been severely traumatized because she's the avatar, she's afraid of going back to her avatar duties. She's forced to be introspective, to take time to figure out who she is. And the most poetic thing to me is that in Book 2, she's told by Unalaq that every avatar before her traveled the world to learn, just like how Aang traveled to learn the 3 elements he didn't know. But Korra never got that experience because her father and Tenzin wanted to keep her safe in the South Pole. So after all that she's gone through, she finally travels the world, not to learn the elements, but to learn about herself, which is what her story has always been about. Through this journey, she's able to learn a new skill, tapping into the connectedness of the world to be able to see where anyone currently is. And she learns to face her enemies with compassion and understanding. It's just beautiful writing that's both perfect for Korra as a character and an honest look at the difficulties of healing from a traumatic experience. But Korra isn't the only character who goes through a lot of growth. Another favorite in this series for me is the fact that so many different characters get their own unique arcs. The core Team Avatar group might not be the most tight-knit unit, but that's because the show spends so much time developing characters outside that group too. Jinora is my favorite example of this. Her story of learning to become a spiritual and airbending master is amazing. The scene where she gets her tattoos at the end of Book 3 had me so emotional. She starts off as just a shy, nerdy kid and develops so naturally into a spiritual leader. Her dad Tenzin also has an interesting arc, first learning to loosen up a bit in Book 1, and then learning in Book 2 that he's his own person outside of being Aang's son. The way that realization clears away the fog and allows him to save his family is so clever. I also just love getting to see him finally unleash his full power in Book 3 against Zahir. And The Legend of Korra loves a good redemption. Suyin and Kai are both fun, interesting characters with relatively similar backstories. They both got into some trouble when they were young, then were given another chance instead of being locked away, and they became great people. After Suyin was caught working working with a gang, she was sent out on her own and founded Zaofu, while Kai was an orphan who was stealing to survive and was given another chance in the new Air Nation. He goes on to play a critical role in helping save Korra, but both of these characters, had they not been given another chance, would have been in prison for a long time. I like the show's emphasis on rehabilitation, and how it uses these characters to make the point that locking people away is wrong, because it doesn't give them the support they need to really thrive and reach their full potential. And speaking of Kai, these glider suits that the Airbenders get in Book 4 are the coolest things ever. I love them. And speaking of Su Yin, the way her relationship with Lin heals over Book 3 is incredible. I love the scene of Lin going to the acupuncturist and having these flashes of memories, and their fight scene afterwards is awesome. It's so interesting to learn about how they were torn apart and what Lin needs to be able to move on. The Legend of Korra really excels at having complex, nuanced characters. Opal, who starts off as a quiet, sheltered person afraid to even ask her mom if she can leave Zaofu, grows up to become a powerful airbender who's not afraid of anyone and always stands up for herself. Even Varric has an interesting arc in Book 4 where he betrays Kuvira and goes on this little adventure with Bolin to give the viewer a peek into how people are fighting back against Kuvira. It's really clever storytelling, and I love all of these characters. Even the villains in this series have such interesting and varied motivations. They're not just evil for the sake of being evil. They all see some kind of injustice in the world and do what they think is right to make it better. I think that's the best kind of villain. A villain who has good intentions and is kind of right, but goes about it in the wrong way. Pretty much all of the villains change the world in some significant positive way. Republic City gets a president. The spirit world joins the physical world, reviving the Air Nation. And the monarchy in the Earth Kingdom ends when Prince Wu decides to abdicate the throne and hold elections. Zahir and Kuvira especially are my favorite villains. I love the idea that one of the people who gets airbending is a super powerful villain. That's a really interesting concept, since we've always known the air nomads as being so peaceful. And for him to be able to unlock an airbending ability we've never seen before is so cool, especially in how they do it, since he's able to fly only after he watches the woman he loves get straight up killed by Su Yin. Without her as his worldly attachment, he's able to enter the void. That's terrifying and dark, but makes for a great villain. And let's be real, the Earth Queen was a horrible ruler who let her people struggle in poverty while she lived in wealthy extravagance. She probably got what was coming to her, and the way her death sets the stage for Kuvira to gain power in Book 4 is just so good. While Korra's dealing with her trauma, the world is kind of forced to choose sides between a power-hungry, nature-destroying military leader who throws people in prison camps, or a spoiled brat who has no idea what he's doing. There's not really a good choice there, and I love that about this show. It's not as easy as the big bad guys versus the rest of the poor innocent people. Things are messy in The Legend of Korra because the world is messy. And on a much less intense note, I just want to mention pro bending. This sport is so much fun. I love all of the pro bending scenes. I love the commentator. I love the new bending style that is developed for it. It's all just a fun new way to use bending and a really creative addition to the Avatar universe. In fact, all of Republic City is fascinating. I love seeing how lightning bending, once a rare and difficult skill, is now so common that people like Mako can do it for a job. The way everything has developed in this new city is so interesting. Also, one of the reasons that I personally love The Legend of Korra that I'm only going to talk about briefly is the fact that Korra and Asami develop a romantic relationship through books 3 and 4 and end up together at the end of the series. This was an important step for queer representation at the time, and it meant a lot to me and a lot of other people. I've made a whole video about this called How The Legend of Korra Made History, so you can watch that if you want to learn more, but I do think that's worth mentioning here, even though there are a ton of other reasons I love this show too. Now let's talk about some of the criticisms. One of the biggest complaints I've seen is that The Legend of Korra isn't just more of The Last Airbender. Some people were disappointed that we don't see more of the old Team Avatar, or that we didn't get a 4th season of The Last Airbender. But that series was done. It ended at the right time with a story that was planned out from start to finish. As much as I loved it, it didn't need another season, and trying to drag it out further would have ruined part of what made it so good. Starting with the next Avatar allows us to get a fresh new story, and if you really want to fill in what happened after The Last Airbender, there are plenty of comics for that. The Legend of Korra gave us a new starting point for a new kind of story. And yeah, the old Team Avatar is barely in it, but that makes sense. It's no longer their story. If The Legend of Korra focused largely on the old Team Avatar, it would no longer be the story of Korra, and it would probably be heavily criticized for relying too much on nostalgia rather than forging its own original path. Trust me, I know it's sad when a story ends and characters we love are no longer the central protagonists. But that's just the way things work. All good things have to come to an end eventually. And if you go into The Legend of Korra already upset that it's not more of The Last Airbender, you're never really giving it a chance. In fact, one of the things I love about Korra is how different it is from The Last Airbender, and how we get to explore new themes and ideas in the same universe. Korra is so unlike Aang that the writers were able to tell a very different story with her. Let's look at just some of the ways they contrast each other. In The Last Airbender, Aang doesn't even want to be the Avatar, but Korra loves being the Avatar from day one. This means that Aang and Korra have to go on different emotional journeys. Aang has to learn to accept his responsibility as the Avatar, while Korra has to learn that being the Avatar won't solve all of her problems. Aang is presented with a world that desperately needs him to restore balance, but Korra is presented with a world that has moved on and doesn't even really seem to want an Avatar anymore. Aang is a person who has to learn how to become the Avatar, while Korra is an Avatar who has to learn about being a well-rounded person. That's why Korra starts off knowing 3 of the elements and learns the 4th by the end of the first season. Her story wasn't about learning the elements like Aang, her story was about learning about herself. The rest of the seasons explore her spiritual abilities and force her to think about who she is and what her place is in this changing world. Aang, being a monk, was already good at spiritual matters and introspection, but Korra has to go through a lot to be able to properly understand herself. Their differences go far beyond Aang being a pacifist and Korra wanting to fight everyone she comes into contact with. The worlds they exist in are entirely different. Aang was all alone except for Katara and Sokka in the beginning, but Korra is raised in the institution of the Avatar, with White Lotus guards and prescribed bending teachers. Aang had to focus on one goal, defeating the Fire Lord, but Korra's goals are much more unclear, and so she faces a variety of different villains, all of whom have much different motivations from Ozai. I think all of that helps Korra feel like a new and interesting story, rather than just being more of the same. It would be boring and repetitive to see Korra go on the exact same journey as Aang, so I'm glad that The Legend of Korra presents us with such a different world for Korra to navigate. As someone who loves The Last Airbender, I know it's sad to see that the world has changed. But that's the thing about worlds. They keep on going and changing no matter what. Nothing is forever. Another criticism I've seen about The Legend of Korra is that some people didn't like the portrayal of Aang, especially when it comes to his kids. In Book 2, there's a whole storyline about how Aang favored Tenzin because he was an airbender and to some degree neglected Kaya and Bumi. And so people who really liked Aang in The Last Airbender say that that's not possible or not a realistic depiction of Aang because he would never have done that. But I disagree. I think it's a bad idea to put someone on a pedestal and think they can do no wrong just because they did one really good thing when they were 12 years old. Aang was just a kid. He had a lot of growing up to do after the series ended, and who he was as a father decades later was probably a lot different from who he was at 12. Plus, with what we know about Aang, it makes sense that he might favor Tenzin. All of Aang's fellow airbenders were killed, his culture almost entirely wiped out. So after ending the war, he suddenly had a new burden, restoring the entire culture of the air nomads. He must have felt an enormous pressure, and so when he only had one airbender son, you can see why he might have felt he had to spend more time with him to help pass on all his airbender knowledge and culture. I'm not saying that it was a kind thing to do or a good way to parent. It obviously hurt Kaya and Bumi, but that's the thing about people. They're not perfect. Even good people hurt other people sometimes, even unintentionally, even while trying to be the best they can. Parenting is hard and people make mistakes doing it, and unfortunately those mistakes can stick around with their kids well through their adulthood. That's just the way things work, and I'm glad that The Legend of Korra had the guts to address that and to realize that even good people can be kind of bad parents sometimes. That doesn't make Aang a bad person, it doesn't invalidate anything he did in The Last Airbender, but it's important to remember that nobody is perfect. Now, back to Korra. I've seen people argue that she is both a Mary Sue and too weak, which is hilarious because those are kind of opposites. A Mary Sue is a character, usually a woman, who is lacking in any flaws or weaknesses and who is perfect and overpowered without really trying. I think the argument that Korra is a Mary Sue stems from the fact that she masters 3 elements early on and learns airbending by the end of book 1. But that hardly makes her overpowered or lacking any flaws. She's an extremely flawed character, especially in book 1. She's too hot-headed, stubborn, and impatient. She rushes into dangerous situations that she's not ready for, and she refuses to admit that she's scared. And while she is powerful, she worked for that power. She trained her entire life learning waterbending, firebending, and earthbending. She learns airbending at the end of book 1 not because it just just appears out of nowhere for her, but because she's robbed of all other options and so is finally in the headspace to be able to do it. And she only gets her other 3 elements back by being so incredibly sad that she finally allows herself to open up to her connection to her past lives. She goes through a lot of growth in learning from her weaknesses, and all the power that she has is very clearly earned. I think the Mary Sue argument might stem from people thinking that a character's flaws need to be physical, like lacking the ability to bend an element, but a lot of Korra's weaknesses are emotional and spiritual, so most of her growth over the series is related to that, rather than just learning new elements. I mean, to say she's a Mary Sue, you would have to ignore all of Book 4, where she spends the entire season training and healing and becoming stronger because she was so severely traumatized at the end of Book 3. As for the argument that she's too weak, I'm not sure how you could come away from the show believing that. Sure, she loses a few battles. It wouldn't make any sense for her to never lose. Imagine how boring that would be. And losing fights is a big part of her emotional development as someone who kind of starts out the series thinking she's indestructible. Plus, of course she loses some fights while she's still healing in Book 4. That's the point. Healing from a traumatic experience like that isn't immediate or easy, but by the end of Book 4, she's an incredibly skilled fighter and has definitely improved her bending a lot from Book 1. I mean, she's the first ever avatar to learn metal bending, which is really cool. At the end of Book 3, despite being chained up by Platinum after sacrificing herself to save the Airbenders, she manages to fight off the fatal poison for a while. Then once she can't stop it anymore, she manages to break out of her chains from pure strength, and then goes on to fight Zahir in this incredibly cool battle despite the literal deathly poison coursing through her veins. That's like the pinnacle of physical and mental strength, to be able and willing to do that. And putting in the work to heal over the next few years also requires a lot of strength. Maybe people were disappointed that the series didn't end with a massive world-crushing fight between only Korra and Kuvira, because taking down Kuvira was really more of a team effort, but that would be missing the point of the series. Korra's role was about saving Kuvira and the city by blocking the super powerful spirit beam head-on, showing Kuvira compassion, and helping her understand that she was doing the wrong thing. I love the scene in the spirit world with Kuvira. It's the culmination of so much growth for Korra. The Legend of Korra didn't need to end with a one-on-one superpower fight, and I'm glad it didn't, because it was more about her emotional strength in dealing with such a uniquely formidable opponent. That's not weakness on Korra's part, it's just a different kind of strength. Korra has so much strength, physically and emotionally, and she earned every single bit of it. She's an incredible avatar who fights through so much adversity to change the world in so many ways. The next criticism I've seen brought up a few times is that people don't like that Toph became a cop after the events of The Last Airbender. And look, I get it, Toph was a troublemaker in The Last Airbender. I get why you might think she would never consider that route. But again, just like Aang, Toph was 12 years old in The Last Airbender. She would have changed a lot between then and when she was an adult helping her friends build Republic City. She had invented this new type of bending, and she wanted to help keep the city safe. This fictional world didn't really have police in the same way that we do in the real world, so Toph had nothing to compare it to. It makes sense that Toph would want to protect people. What also makes sense if you watch Korra through till the end is that Toph eventually realizes that she made a mistake. She straight up says that no matter how much she fought crime, she never actually reduced crime. She learned that policing isn't the solution to crime. She became so disillusioned with everything that she ran away to live in the swamp. So just like Aang, Toph isn't perfect. She went into something with good intentions, but later realized she made the wrong call. That happens. That's how people work. You might not like that direction for her character, but I think it makes a lot of sense. And I don't think the show shies away from showing how corrupt and inept the police force in Republic City is. When Korra first arrives, she literally fights the police, and they become more concerned with the property damage she caused than with helping the people who were threatened by the triple threat triad. Then later, the police round up innocent protesters and hold people indefinitely without trial, which is obviously terrible. Republic City is not ever shown as a utopia. It's a flawed city created by flawed people, and honestly, that's realistic. Another criticism I've seen is that some people didn't like that The Legend of Korra severed Korra's connection to her past lives in Book 2. I actually really like this writing decision for a couple reasons. For one, it forces her to confront who she is without Rava, since her identity had always been so wrapped up in being the Avatar, and figuring out who she is outside of being the Avatar is a major part of her growth growth and story. And secondly, Korra's story was always about the next era, about starting over and being something new. What better way to do that than to literally force her to confront everything alone, without the help of her past lives like Aang had? Yeah, it's sad and it's tough, but that's the point. It has a strong emotional impact on the viewer because you know how important those past lives were to helping Aang. She didn't end the Avatar cycle completely, like Aang would have if Katara hadn't happened to have some fancy healing water. She just restarted it. The next Avatar will be able to call upon Korra for help, and so on. But the fact that Korra's the first Avatar in 10,000 years to truly be on her own makes her growth through books 3 and 4 even more interesting. Some people have called Korra weak for having this happen, but Vaatu was an extremely powerful dark spirit and was able to rip Rava right out of her, which is not something she could have prepared for. I think some folks are just so ready to criticize Korra for anything that if she fails at something, she's ruined the Avatar universe. But if she doesn't fail at something, she's overpowered and too strong and things come too easy for her. This change was a necessary one for her growth, and it shows her being a complex character who's both able to lose and able to get back up afterward and keep fighting. And none of this is to say that The Legend of Korra is perfect. I definitely have my criticisms of the show, just like I have criticisms of The Last Airbender. But in both cases, I think the pros massively outweigh the cons. For a couple quick examples, I think Book 1 never properly addresses the concerns of the non-benders. Like, sure, Amon turned out to be a waterbender and then was killed by his brother, but what about all his supporters? They had legitimate complaints about being oppressed by benders. What was actually done to help them? The show never fully addressed the fallout of the equalist movement. They say that the council was disbanded and a new president elected, which is a significant change, but we don't learn what policies the president has that helps non-benders. I think that might at least partially be a problem with Korra's season structure. Whereas The Last Airbender had 3 seasons with about 20 episodes each, Korra has 4 seasons with about 13 episodes each. So even though Korra has 1 more season, it actually has 9 fewer episodes overall. I think if Korra could have had a longer first season, it might have been able to deal with its complex equalist plot with more nuance. But who knows? On the flip side, Book 2 was definitely too long. A lot of stuff happens that doesn't really matter, and Unalaq and Varric are not interesting villains. In fact, in Book 4, in the summary flashback episode Remembrances, the show straight up makes fun of Unalaq and says he doesn't measure up to the other villains, which is hilariously self-aware. Book 2 has its good parts, and the ending is necessary to set up Book 3, but it's my least favorite book in The Legend of Korra, and probably could have been shortened a lot and possibly just incorporated more into Book 1. The problem there, I think, was that Korra was initially only approved for 1 season. Then it got a 2nd season, and then it got a 3rd and a 4th at the same time. So it wasn't until books 3 and 4 that the creators really knew they could make an ongoing, developing, multi-season story. That's why Korra ends too neatly at the end of Book 1. I wish Korra could have just been approved for 4 seasons right from the start. I think that would have resulted in a better show, but with the constraints they were given, I think the creators did the best they could. And books 3 and 4 really do shine. I love them so much. I also find all of the love triangle stuff with Mako in the first 2 books really boring. Although I get that it's maybe realistic teenage awkwardness, I'm just not really a fan of Mako's character, like, at all. Anyway, I know that The Legend of Korra is not perfect, but I still think it's really, really good. It's an ambitious continuation of the series that explores a lot of new themes from a new perspective, and it allows us to see more of this fascinating world with lovable and relatable characters. I hope that with Korra coming to Netflix, people who missed it, or who didn't give it a chance back then, might be able to watch it now. As long as you go into it with an open mind, you could be pleasantly surprised at how good it is, especially books 3 and 4. The characters are so well developed by the end of it, and the growth that everyone goes through, particularly Korra herself, is phenomenal. So that's why I love The Legend of Korra. What do you think of it? Let me know your favorite moment from the series in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and giving it a thumbs up. And if you want to support the production of future videos like this one, I could really use your support over on Patreon. If you're not currently a supporter there, please check it out, as it would help me immensely to be able to keep making videos. And I want to give a huge thank you to all of my current Patreon supporters. This wouldn't be possible without you. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.